The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries. Morning sunlight rested gently on wooden tables, and the low hum of quiet conversations filled the air. Daniel stood in line, his posture relaxed, his eyes tired but kind. He came here often before walking to the small bookstore where he worked. It was his quiet ritual, a moment of calm before the day began. Ahead of him stood a woman, her posture straight, her clothes neat but not flashy. She looked like someone who belonged to a busier world. Yet here she was, standing quietly like everyone else. Clara's hands rested lightly on her purse, her expression calm. She gave no sign of impatience, though her eyes seemed to watch more than they revealed. Daniel noticed her only briefly, the way one notices strangers in passing. He thought nothing more of it. The line moved forward. When it was her turn, she ordered her drink, her voice steady and polite. She reached for her card, but as the machine beeped in refusal, a silence fell between her and the barista. Clara's face did not change, but a faint tension touched her eyes. Daniel, without thinking twice, stepped closer. Daniel reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills. His movement was simple, without hesitation, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. He placed the money on the counter with a quiet nod toward the barista. "It's fine," he said softly, almost brushing the matter aside. Clara turned toward him, her eyes narrowing slightly in surprise. She was not used to such gestures, not from strangers. People often waited for her to pay, to prove her place, to show her worth. But here was a man who did not ask, did not question, and did not pause. "You didn't have to," she said quietly, her voice carrying both gratitude and curiosity. Daniel smiled faintly, a small smile that seemed to live on his face more out of habit than choice. "It happens. Don't worry about it." Clara studied him for a second longer. There was no trace of pride in his tone, no expectation of thanks. He simply moved on, as if kindness was part of his daily rhythm. The barista handed her drink to her, and Daniel stepped aside, waiting for his own turn. For a moment, Clara felt something she had not felt in a long time, disarmed. The coffee shop grew busier as more people entered, escaping the morning chill. Daniel carried his cup to a corner table, the one near the shelf of second-hand books where he often sat. He placed his worn backpack on the floor and pulled out a paperback, its pages bent with age. Clara found her own seat nearby. She did not usually linger in public places like this, but something kept her still. She sipped her coffee slowly, her eyes drifting once in a while toward the man who had stepped in so quietly to help her. He did not look around. He did not watch her. He simply opened his book and sank into the printed words, as though they carried him to another place. His posture was calm, his manner unhurried. Clara's gaze softened. She was used to people noticing her, adjusting their words and behavior to her presence. Here, she felt invisible, and strangely, it comforted her. The small act of paying for her drink was not about her at all, she realized. It was about who he was. Daniel looked up once, adjusting his glasses. Their eyes met for the briefest second. He gave a polite nod before returning to his book. Clara felt the corners of her lips lift, though she did not fully smile. When Clara finished her coffee, she gathered her purse and walked outside. The cool air greeted her, crisp and fresh. She moved toward her car, a sleek black sedan parked nearby. It was the kind of vehicle that often turned heads, though Daniel had not seemed to notice it when he walked in. She placed her hand on the door handle, but her eyes lifted at the sound of footsteps. Across the street, she saw him again. Daniel had exited the shop, his jacket pulled tighter around him as he walked toward the bus stop. It struck her then. He had paid for her coffee, and yet, he did not drive. He waited at the bus stop like countless others, his expression calm, his book now tucked under his arm. Clara paused, her hand resting on the car door. A quiet thought stirred within her. The man who helped her without hesitation lived with far less than she did. The driver approached to open her door, but she raised a hand, signaling him to wait. She watched Daniel for a moment longer. His presence was unremarkable to most, yet she found herself unable to look away. Something about his simplicity unsettled her more than any meeting boardroom ever had. The bookstore smelled of old paper and polished wood. It was a narrow space, tucked between larger buildings, but it carried a charm that regular customers loved. Daniel moved quietly among the shelves, straightening spines and arranging titles. His hands worked with care, as though every book mattered. The bell above the door chimed softly. Daniel looked up, expecting a familiar customer. Instead, he saw her again. Clara stepped inside, her presence calm but unmistakable. She did not speak right away. She let her eyes travel over the shelves, the rows of novels and history volumes, the children's section at the back. There was warmth in this place, the kind of warmth money could not design. Looking for something in particular? Daniel asked, his voice steady, polite. Clara's lips curved slightly. Just looking. She walked slowly down an aisle, her fingers brushing lightly over the spines. Daniel returned to his work, though he could not help but glance toward her once in a while. Clara noticed his careful movements, the patience in the way he worked. She thought of the people she often met, fast, sharp, always reaching for more. Here was a man content to arrange books, to take small steps with quiet meaning. For reasons she could not explain, Clara felt drawn to stay. When Clara stepped out of the bookstore, the evening light painted the street in soft orange. The air carried the faint chill of a setting sun, and the glow from the shop windows spilled onto the sidewalk behind her. Her car was waiting, polished and quiet, the driver ready to open the door. She walked toward it slowly, her heels clicking lightly against the pavement. Yet as her hand reached for the handle, she paused. Her eyes drifted back to the shop. Through the glass, she could see Daniel moving about, placing books back into place, speaking to a customer who had just entered. His movements were steady, his voice low and even. The sight held her for longer than she expected. Clara was a woman who had meetings scheduled to the minute, decisions stacked upon decisions. Yet here, outside this small store, time felt slower. The driver cleared his throat softly, waiting for her signal. Clara finally turned, stepping into the car, but as the door closed, she allowed herself one last glance back at the bookstore, its warm light glowing like a small world apart from her own. For the first time in a long while, she wondered what it might feel like to belong in such a world. The office was high above the city, glass walls framing towers and lights below. Clara sat behind her desk, a polished surface stacked with files and reports. The digital clock on the wall blinked late hours, but her pen lay untouched. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting toward the window. The city pulsed with movement, cars tracing lines of light on the streets far below. It was a view that once thrilled her, a reminder of power, position, and the life she had built. But tonight, it felt distant. Her thoughts did not rest on quarterly numbers or expansion strategies. Instead, they circled back to a small coffee shop and a man who had stepped forward without hesitation. She remembered the bus stop, his worn jacket, the way he handled books with care, as though every title deserved respect. Clara pressed her lips together. She had wealth, recognition, and authority. Yet she could not shake the image of a man who gave without expecting, who carried quiet strength without needing to display it. She closed the folder in front of her and leaned forward on her desk, her chin resting lightly against her hand. For the first time in years, Clara realized she was watching someone not as a CEO, but as a woman. Daniel's apartment was small, but neat. The walls carried shelves filled with books rather than decorations. The kitchen was tucked into one corner, the living space into another, and a modest bed rested near the window. He sat at a small table with a simple meal, bread, soup, and a few vegetables. His book lay open beside his plate, its pages marked with folded corners. He ate quietly, the faint hum of city life drifting in through the window. There was no grandness here, no polished shine, yet Daniel seemed content. He turned the page of his book, pausing to take another spoonful of soup. He had lived like this for years, steady and unhurried. Work at the bookstore, evenings with books, occasional weekends spent walking in the park. It was not a life that many envied, but it was his. What he did not know was that someone else was thinking of him tonight, in an office far above the city, someone who had noticed not his possessions, but his heart. Daniel closed his book and leaned back in his chair. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling. Tomorrow would come, like every day before it, and he would return to the bookstore. He did not yet know that his life was quietly shifting. The next morning, the bell above the bookstore door chimed again. Daniel looked up from the counter, expecting the usual flow of customers. Instead, he saw her **. Clara stepped inside, her attire simpler this time. No sharp suit, no driver waiting outside, just a quiet presence, carrying herself with ease. She looked different here, almost blending into the shelves that surrounded her. Daniel blinked, his surprise soft but visible. "Back again?" he asked. Clara nodded, her lips curving faintly. "I never finished looking yesterday." He gestured lightly toward the aisles. "Take your time. Clara moved through the store slowly, her fingers brushing the books as she walked. Daniel watched for a moment before returning to his work, though he remained aware of her presence. She selected another book and approached the counter. As she handed it to him, their eyes met again. "Do you read all of these?" she asked, her tone carrying more curiosity this time. Not all. Daniel replied with a small smile. "But as many as I can." Clara nodded, studying him quietly. For reasons she did not name, she felt at ease here. The world outside was sharp, demanding, relentless, but in this bookstore, the pace softened, and so did she. The day grew long, and the bookstore emptied as the last customer left. Daniel locked the door, slipping his keys into his pocket. He turned, surprised to find Clara still waiting outside. "Do you usually walk home?" she asked, her tone casual. Daniel nodded. "Most days. It's not far." Clara hesitated, then fell into step beside him. The street stretched quiet under the dim light of lamps. Their footsteps echoed softly on the pavement. They spoke little at first. The silence was not heavy, but calm, like the quiet between pages of a book. Clara stole a glance at him. His pace was steady, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever wish for more?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. More than this. The bookstore, the bus, the small things. He thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes, but then I remember. If you can enjoy the little things, maybe you already have enough." Clara's chest tightened. She had more than most people could ever dream of, yet she often felt she had less. They reached a corner where their paths split. Daniel smiled faintly. "This is me." Clara paused, reluctant to leave. Then, "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow." Daniel nodded, the small warmth in his smile unchanged. The city sparkled below as Clara stood by her window. Her penthouse stretched wide behind her, every surface polished, every detail precise. Yet in her hands, she held something simpler, a paperback from Daniel's store. She ran her thumb over its worn spine, the faded cover soft under her touch. It was not rare, not valuable, not even new, but it felt different. She sank into the chair by the glass wall and opened the book. The words on the page were plain, yet they carried honesty. It reminded her of Daniel's voice, the way he spoke without pretense. Her mind drifted back to his words on their walk. Enjoy the little things. She had spent years chasing everything: bigger, larger deals, wider reach, higher numbers, and still, the quiet felt missing. Clara closed the book and pressed it against her chest. The thought rose uninvited. He did not know who she was. To him, she was just another customer, a stranger whose coffee he had once paid for. A soft laugh escaped her lips. For once, she liked it that way. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt less like a CEO, and more like a woman simply holding a book, looking out at the city lights. The next afternoon, Clara stepped into the bookstore again. The bell chimed, and Daniel looked up with a nod of recognition. This time, she lingered near the back, watching as he worked. A mother entered with her young son, the boy pulling excitedly toward the children's section. Daniel followed them, crouching down to the boy's height. "Looking for an adventure?" Daniel asked. His smile warmed. The boy's eyes lit up as he scanned the shelves. "I want pirates." Daniel chuckled softly and pulled a book from the row, handing it to him with care. The boy's face brightened, and he clutched it to his chest before hurrying back to his mother. Clara's chest softened as she watched. Daniel's kindness did not shift with age, wealth, or status. It reached everyone the same way. When he returned to the counter, he noticed Clara watching. "Find something today?" he asked. She shook her head, smiling faintly. "Not yet, just looking." But the truth was, she was not there for books. She was there for him. Clara felt a quiet decision forming within her. She had the power to change lives with her signature. But Daniel was changing lives with nothing more than patience, presence, and kindness. For the first time, she wondered which kind of power mattered more. It was late in the day when Clara finally spoke what she had hidden. The shop was empty, the shelves resting in silence. Daniel was at the counter, stacking a few books, when she stepped closer. "There's something you don't know about me," she began, her tone careful. Daniel glanced up, his brows slightly raised. "All right." Clara took a slow breath. "I'm not just a customer. I run a company, a large one. Most people call me a CEO." Her words hung in the air, quiet but heavy. Daniel's eyes lingered on her, then dropped briefly to the book in his hands. "Does that change who you are?" he asked simply. Clara blinked, unprepared for his question. What do you mean? Daniel set the book down, folding his arms lightly. You're still the person who walked in here, the person I've spoken to. A title doesn't change that. For a long moment, Clara stood silent. She was used to reactions: shock, admiration, or calculated interest. But his calmness disarmed her once again. I thought it might matter, she admitted softly. Daniel's smile was small, but steady. Not to me. Something inside Clara eased. She realized then that she had spent years searching for someone who would see her not for her position, but for herself. The evening light dimmed, casting soft shadows across the bookstore. Daniel and Clara sat near the front window, 2 chairs pulled close, a small table between them. The store was quiet now, the outside world moving at its usual hurried pace. Inside, time seemed slower. Clara rested her hands on her book, her posture more relaxed than he had ever seen. I don't usually stay in one place, she admitted, but here, I don't feel the need to leave. Daniel listened, his expression steady. Maybe it's not the place, maybe it's the pace. Sometimes slowing down is what we need most. Clara looked at him, her lips curving softly. And sometimes we need someone who reminds us of that. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was not empty, but full of understanding, of beginnings, of something unspoken yet real. Clara thought back to the first day, the sound of her card declining, and his hand reaching forward without hesitation. She had watched him then. She was still watching now, but with different eyes. Daniel picked up his book, tapping it lightly. So, will I see you here again tomorrow? Clara smiled, this time fully. You will. And as the lights dimmed around them, both knew that something simple, and yet extraordinary, had begun.